on? Did I just turn it off? Yeah, okay. This is the December 2nd, 2013 regular meeting of the Lake Forest City Council Finance Committee. Could we please call the roll?
Mayor Schoenheider?
Here.
Chairman Paneleon?
Here.
Alderman Novit?
Here.
Alderman Waldeck?
Here.
Alderman Moore?
Here.
Alderman Reisenberg?
Here.
Alderman Tack?
Here.
Alderman Palmer?
Here.
Alderman Edelman?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next item is consideration of minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on November 18th, 2013. Any updates, corrections, comments, changes? There being none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Third item on the agenda is an update on the Deer Path Golf Course well study, which is just for committee discussion and input. It's going to be presented by Public Works Director Michael Thomas.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Mayor, members of the Finance Committee. This evening, staff is happy to present its findings on the guaranteed maximum price for the golf course water well. I'm going to take you through some of the background information. First, to remind yourselves and the people at home on how we got here and why we're discussing this project in general. Deer Path Golf Course is one of the top 5 water users. It fluctuates and changes each year, but based on our data from 2012, they use 16,200,000 gallons, of which an overwhelming majority of that is used in the overnight hours when we have the high demand placed on our water plant. That represents about 1% of our total pumpage throughout the entire 12-month period. They spend approximately $60,000 a year paying for water. They pay the same rates that everybody else does in the city for water. So we began actually back in 2008 to talk about the idea of installing a water well for the irrigation system at Deer Path Golf Course. On October 7th of this year, City Council approved an agreement with McMahon Associates out of Neenah, Wisconsin, to develop what we refer to as a guaranteed maximum price, where they would do approximately 30% design drawings. They would go out and solicit bids for the entire project. They would come back, they would manage the actual construction of the project, but come back to us with what they refer to as a guaranteed maximum price. No change orders, one number, here it is. That work has been going on since October 7th. Staff level, we've spent a lot of time working on this with them. The project, and I want to give you a little more specifics on the project so you understand when you see the number, why the number is such a large number. The well itself is a 1,380-foot deep well that gets them the volume and quantity of water that they need with a 550-gallon per minute pump. There's an underground line that takes it to the 2 ponds out at number 5 and number 12. We had a deadline to have the pump house completed by April 1st. It would be a 20 by 30 building, a simple block CMU building with asphalt shingle roof, nothing special. We would have a new electrical run to the pump house as well as upgrade the electrical service to the existing pump house because that's where we would pull the electric for the actual well. So there's 2 service upgrades, one brand new, one upgrade. We would be required to put in a fire alarm system in this new 20 by 30 building. In that building, we would have 2 625 GPM pumps, obviously totaling 1,250 gallon per minute. That is something that the irrigation company told Tom Wilson and the maintenance guys at the Deer Path Golf Course that optimally they would like to see at 1,250 GPM for the irrigation system. There were 2 restrooms that were added, so that would require a new sanitary line as well as a new water line. We'd have HVAC fans and heaters for the bathrooms. We were going to put a simple basic concrete pad adjacent to the building for any vending machines. We also talked about replacing the cart path, and I apologize, the pointer does not work, but replace the cart path all the way out from the parking lot, which is the far area on the left, starting basically where our clubhouse is and take it all the way out to the 2 ponds on the far right. Site access, doing this during the winter / early spring is obviously has the potential to be a challenge. So there's a product called mud mats that are primarily up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, that would need to be rented. Those are not cheap. And then you obviously have your post-construction seed and blanket, and as we required, the entire project would be completed by April 30th. All of those aspects of the project, the time frame, gave us a guaranteed maximum price of $2,162,000. Very expensive. We learned of this number last Monday afternoon. Tuesday morning, probably 6 or 7 of us sat down for about 2.5 hours with McMahon and started to go through the spec and say, okay, we need to bring the number down. How about this? What if we extend the well drilling to May 16th? With that, they only had one bid from one well company. The other two said they couldn't meet the time frame and they had other projects going. The fact that we extended it to May 16th gave them some more time. 2 more companies put their bid in, and they were actually better numbers than the first. We removed the cart path replacement entirely. And then we proposed access over the bike path that goes over Deer Path. It has the width. We would, though, need to replace that path. There's a 40-ton well rig that needs to be driven out to that site. Obviously, concrete trucks, semis, et cetera, that path is going to get chewed up if we use it. There's only 2 inches of asphalt on it. So we would need to spend $127,000 at the end, add that to your savings to replace that bike path. But we would save approximately $250,000 not having the mud mats and all the rehab of the area. We again extended the project to be completed 1 month later, May 30th. Their opinion of probable cost, it was not a guaranteed maximum price simply because they didn't have the time to finalize their numbers. But it would bring it down from $2,162,000 to $1,744,000. Add back in your bike path, you're at $1,871,000. So a savings of $291,000. We went back to them over the weekend and said, what if we were to remove the 2 bathrooms and the concrete pad? And again, the same 3 assumptions would exist on the first cut. That brought it down to $1,653,000. Again, we've got to add cost in for the path. That takes you up to $1,780,000. Savings on the bathroom removal is $91,000. The other, we, in the meantime, have talked internally about a couple other ideas of things that we could potentially look at. Number one, the idea of finalizing the drawings. Again, they have drawings and specifications that are at what we refer to the 30% design level. To bring those to completion, where we have an actual final bid specification that we could put out to bid ourselves at any time we wanted to, any time throughout the year. There would be an expense of $37,000 to complete that design. One idea is to put that out to bid in midsummer with construction to start right after Labor Day. One possible idea. Another idea was to construct more of an access road all the way out from basically the clubhouse to the well, which is out close to the bike path on Laurel Avenue. To do that would be a 9-foot wide access road that the vehicles could use for future refurbishment or repair of any of the pumps or any of the equipment. That road would be $178,000. Another idea that we came up with is to place the well just west of the maintenance garage. So the maintenance facility right there, I'm sorry for the pointer, and we would place the well in approximately that area. You've got very good access to electric coming down Deer Path. You would not have any damage to your course because you would access it from behind the maintenance garage, so it's very quick off Deer Path into the maintenance area. You drill a well. The only challenge you will have is to reroute and redo your irrigation system because all the pumps, all that electrical equipment is way out near Laurel Ave on number 5. We would combine this, though, with the project that IDOT is proposing for Deer Path and 41. If you remember, with the flooding issues that we have at Deer Path and 41, IDOT has in their 5-year capital plan to upgrade the booster station, the pump station under 41, and with that would come the design and the construction of 2 ponds on Deer Path Golf Course. First one would be near 17, the second one would be right near number 1. They would be interconnected with a pipe, and after we pass the pond on number 1, it would come out to Deer Path, go into the existing pipe, and flow into the creek. That's their solution. We've reviewed this with them a couple times, and it's a very good design. But to incorporate those ponds, or that pond near 17, as the pond that we would put the water into, and then we again would pull from it and go ahead and put it into our irrigation system. So, but that again is a couple years off. So that is a summary of what we have been working on with McMahon Associates since October 7th. I'm reminded of this. This is something that we received when we were working on our water plant project. Our HVAC engineer back in 2000 gave this to us, of time, cost, and quality. And that typically with projects, you can pick 2 of them. It's difficult to have all 3. So if time and cost are important, you then will sacrifice to a certain extent your quality. If quality and time is important, that's fine, but you'll pay more for it, and so on and so forth. So that is the review and the summary of our work to date. That is the guaranteed maximum price that McMahon has provided, and some of the alternates we were reviewing. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Other than the $60,000 savings, and that we're spending $60,000 now, are there any other potential savings we see out there, like not having to increase the capacity of the water filtration plant, not having to deal with higher water prices, which we may do something about tonight?
The challenge we have with the water plant is that, and we actually are beginning to look at our capacity down at the water plant, and in our capital improvement plan for next year, we have a study to look at our overall capacity. This helps when we're able to take Deer Path offline, but it helps a little. If you were to ask me 7 years ago, taking Deer Path offline, much bigger help. Today, the demand we have in the overnight hours is huge. So we first go to our park system, and we'll stop irrigating Deer Path, west, south, all of our parks. We then go to the golf course and ask them not to irrigate. There's other people out there that take that water in a heartbeat, and it's a challenge for our water plant operators in the overnight hours to keep up with that supply. So we're going to be looking into that next fiscal year and studying the capacity issue with the water plant. But the truth of the matter, as I've mentioned many a times, is that we have given many irrigation and pool permits out over the past 10 years, and that really has put a stress on the water plant.
Well, if we take $1.7 million and instead of doing a well on the golf course, put it toward expanding the filtration plant, will that get us more bang for our buck?
Absolutely, without question.
Mike, my recollection is we initially agreed to spend $26,000 or approximately for the study.
Mm-hmm.
What was our estimate at that point, or our guesstimate for the cost here?
Lane,
Like $1 million something, wasn't it? $1 million
It
too?
was. The well company that we began speaking with back in 2008, the Parks and Recreation Superintendent spoke with, I believe the company is Lane Western. Their estimate at that point in 2008 was $500,000 simply for the well. That's it, for them to come in and dig a well, nothing else, that's all they do. They'll install the pump to pull the water, but no pipes, no irrigation system, nothing. That was $500,000. This past August, Kemper Sports went ahead and reviewed some of the ideas and plans and things we've been discussing. They came up with their estimate of $1,164,000. So that was what we were basing this on. I understand when we spoke with you on this back on October 7th, we were hoping it would come in around $900,000. 900 to 1.2 is in our minds what we were thinking. but it obviously came in much, much higher.
Is there any reason for us to consider moving forward with this?
No.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I've got some questions and comments. It's clearly way too much money. The wetland area we have south of the first fairway, is that elevation higher or lower or about the same as where the pond would be put in at 17? Any idea?
I believe it is lower. From the standpoint of the pond that we would be putting in on 17, the proposed project has, I believe, a 36-inch diameter pipe that will take it from that pond, go through the parking lot, into the pond next to one. Sure.
And the state will pay for that 36-inch?
Yes.
Yeah, see, that's a
Yes.
good deal.
Yes. So the pond, I apologize again not for having a pointer, but the pond would be in this area, if you can see with the cursor. From there, we run a pipe, a 36-inch pipe that comes all the way over to this area. Thank you. So 17 pond, run a 36-inch pipe all the way to this area that then has another pond that, again, this entire pipe length is fed gravity, and then when it hits a point, it goes out into the 54-inch pipe that's underneath Deer Path and heads east to the creek.
So, but again, just to be clear, so the wetlands by fairway number 1 is lower than over by 17?
Yes. Yes,
That kind of surprises me just from my familiarity with the golf course, but I'll take your word for it. So, and are we allowed to excavate a pond in that wetland area? I know you can't fill in wetlands, but can we increase that wetland by excavating a pond there?
Yes.
So that's not a problem.
No, it's another problem.
So, and have we considered maybe putting a well in east of the parking lot near where this new pond would be?
We could put one there, sure. The reason we chose to go behind the maintenance shed, again, close to the new pond that will go in at 17, number one, you limit the access. You have a short drive up here. You're not going to tear up the parking lot. Number two, you've got great access to electric. So those two things are going to save you money, and it'll have very minimal disturbance to the course.
So we could keep it real simple if we just did the deep well by the maintenance shed and put it into the new pond by 17. So
Correct.
then my next question is, then would we have to pipe one of those two ponds up to the 5th green where the...
And that we didn't get that far. What we would need to do is yes, we would need to run a pipe, again, from the new pond on 17 to wherever there is a larger size main for his irrigation system. So Tommy has larger size mains at Deer Path and then smaller whips. But we've got to find where that is. And yes, there will be a cost of running from that pond to that larger main and teeing into that. And that's how you get water to the irrigation system. So you would have a pond, a well, and a small pump house all adjacent to 17. And that is what would run your irrigation system.
I mean, I'm thinking here that since this is so dramatically over anybody's expectation, that maybe if there are a lot of questions about it, that we could maybe handle them offline with Mike. Since unless somebody wakes up in the middle of the night with an incredible brainstorm about how to cut the cost of this project in half, it's really not likely to happen. I mean, it's got a 31-year plus payback at $60,000 a year. And they're gonna, I just think, I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just don't know that this is really, we can move on to the next item on the agenda.
I just have one
and talk
more
about
salient
water.
comment to make, George, and that is I was talking to Ed Heiser, who runs the parks for Lake Bluff on this task force, and they floated a bond to put in the well at Lake Bluff. And I asked them what the cost was, and it was about $2.5 million. But it wasn't just a well, it was an entire new irrigation system for the golf course with a well. So this seems unduly large for just the well system. And if the state of Illinois is going to be doing that in the next couple of years, then I think we kick back, we buy the water from the city, and we just meticulously analyze this and come up with the most cost-effective program going forward that we can.
Yeah, as we approach Christmas, there's a lot of things I want right now. And, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm sensing with the discussion where it's going, but this would be great. But as we're going into December 12th meeting, analyzing our budget items, I want this. I want to build it, but it's just not the time for it. We're fretting about the state cutting back contribution of the city. What a horrible thing it would be if we committed to do this and then the state cut back and we had city employees on the street. We don't want to create our own crisis. It's not the time for it. I'd love it. Point made.
So, any other final comments before we move on to the next item? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Michael.
Yep, thank you.
The next item, also having to do with the water plant, is a review of the water rate structure that's going to be presented by Elizabeth Holub, who's the Director of Finance. This is also for just discussion and input, no decisions.
Good evening. The purpose of the presentation this evening is to follow up from the October Finance Committee discussion and provide a summary of the analysis that the staff has been able to do to date on the water rate structure and potential changes in the water rate structure. Before I start the presentation, I do want to just provide a little bit of background on the two systems that we have in water billing and the data that we have, and that may provide some obvious clarification of why we're waiting on some additional reporting capabilities from our vendor. First is that the actual billing is performed in HTE, in the financial system. And that has limited reporting capabilities, and it has the added complexity of the fact that it's driven based on the quarterly billing structure. So, as you know, 1/3 of the city is billed each month on a rotating quarterly cycle. And so we don't have good data in HTE as a result of that. So a few years ago, the city contracted with Baker Tilly to provide meter monthly monitoring, and that goes into a separate database. And the city conducts meter reads of all meters on a monthly basis, and that goes into a separate system. We have additional reporting capabilities through that Baker Tilly system, but that ignores billing cycles. So it doesn't tell us what billing cycle that particular person is on. However, but what we have done is to provide us the flexibility to do accurate revenue projections on different revenue structures as we go through this discussion and analysis of a second tier and changes in the fixed rate and variable rate structures. We have contracted with Baker Tilly to write for us some custom reporting using the monthly meter analysis and give us additional tools. So they are still developing that. They should have that finished very soon, and our hope is that we'll have that, be able to do that analysis in latter December and early January, and have that to provide some accurate revenue projections for you at the January Finance Committee meeting under certain actual revenue structures, fee structures. So with that introduction,
let me just clarify. So
Okay.
you've got some very broad brush data, but unable to specifically understand what's happening month by month through the
Right.
summer season?
right, so especially when
So
we're
you
looking...
get this next round of input.
Right, so especially with this second tier, we'll need this additional reporting tool through Baker Tilly to accurately assess when certain accounts would trigger a second tier and be able to generate some revenue projections based on that second tier.
And how
Right.
far away are you from getting that data at this point? do you
It
think?
should be momentarily. They had indicated that they thought they would have it done last week. I think with the holidays, they got a little bit behind. We sent them an email today and got the out of office that they'd be out of office until today. And so we're hoping today or tomorrow they'll have an update for us. We may have it this week. So At the October Finance Committee, the committee began discussing potential changes in the water rate structure. Staff received input from the committee on potential revisions, and three concepts that the staff was asked to explore included increasing the fixed rate portion to recover specific aspects or a specific aspect of the water utility budget. Debt service was specifically noted at the October Finance Committee meeting as being one aspect to consider. A second tier rate for high consumption to incentivize conservation in peak demand periods. And third, inclusion of a minimum water amount in the fixed rate.
I thought on that last slide, the middle point there, it wasn't just to incentivize conservation, but it was also to help build a reserve to increase the water plant because of those needs, right? I mean,
Yes,
that's the positive end of this.
absolutely. It
This
would
is a bit-
generate additional revenues.
Some people want their lawn and they'll pay for it, and I think it's important to point out, just to. Ours turns brown.
So based on the analysis that we are able to do in the system without modification, what is especially useful is that we have two very distinctly different years in the last 2 years. We have the very hot, dry summer of 2012 and a cool, wet summer of 2013. So we have 2 years of very contrasting usage, which I think is good. Going into this analysis, we'll be able to see two extremes on potential impacts of a change in the revenue rate structure. So we are able to capture system-wide the total 1,000 gallons billed in the 12-month periods ended September 2012 and September 2013. You can see how those differ. The predominant variable rate in effect for that 12-month period, and the variable rate revenue generated as a result of that consumption. Fixed rate revenue right now, which is the fixed charges assessed on each meter account, generates approximately $640,000 a year. And so you can see how widely variant the annual revenue in the water fund can be. So in the 12 months ended September 2012, we generated just under $7 million. And in the 12 months ended September 2013, $6.15 million. We then drilled down further into the annual consumption based on the accounts. You'll see we have just under 6,700 metered accounts billed annually to see how the annual consumption in a particular range of annual consumption varied between the 2 years. So this is consumption over the 12-month period, so 1 to 49,000 gallons consumed, and then you can see in each grouping how many of the metered accounts fell in that range for that 12-month period and the percentage of the total. So you can see that in the 250,000 gallons and higher, we run about 15% of our total accounts system-wide, with roughly 32 to 34% in the 100 to 249. Now, what is difficult and what the additional reporting will provide us is that is annual consumption, but we don't know how that fell over billing periods. And if we go to a second tier rate in a particular quarter and we set that at a particular level, what we want to be able to do with the additional reporting is to try to calculate how many accounts in a particular billing period will fall above that and by how much, and be able to generate with some level of certainty about how much revenue that's going to generate with the different tiered rates. So that's what we're hoping to capture with the additional reporting.
You also have an issue with, I mean, it's pretty, it's sort of a classic 80-20 rule here if you look at it and sort of figure the percentages. But above 250, you don't really know right now which ones are particularly heavy users among single-family homes, and which ones are, multi-unit buildings of some sort where there's a single meter.
Right.
So it may not all be that, there may not be any single-family homes that are over 2 million. Those could all be commercial or multi-family structures of some sort.
Golf courses.
Or golf, yeah, right. That's in there somewhere.
Now, this begins to get a little detailed, but I'll walk through. This is a water rate analysis of our current water rate structure. So the current variable rate for the city's water is $5.14 per 1,000 gallons. So that is billed in addition to the quarterly fixed charge based on the meter size. Most meters fall in the $20 per quarter range. So a customer would pay $20 per quarter plus $5.14 per 1,000 gallons consumed in that billing period. The projected revenue in the current fiscal year budget, the customer charge, as I mentioned, generates about $640,000. We budgeted $641,880. Other revenue in the water fund is miscellaneous permit-related and other utility fund revenue amounts to about $350,000. And then the consumption charges, what we did in the FY14 budget was use a 5-year average consumption at the current rate was $5,932,824. At the 5-year average usage, each 1 cent added to the variable rate generates $11,542. Looking at the expenditure side, the water utility fund budget for FY14 was separated here into 3 categories. First was operations. The operations budget is $3,481,643. Debt service, annual debt service for the water fund is $2,213,020, and then the capital outlay transfer, which is a transfer of operating revenues to the capital fund for water, which funds the water fund capital improvement program, was $1,360,000. So the total fiscal year 14 budget for the water utility fund on the operations side was $7,054,663. The rate required is just a numeric formula applying the meter charges, the customer fixed charges, and the other revenue first to operations, and then taking the variable rate revenue and just indicating how much of the 514 rate is required to meet each of those components of the expenditure budget. And based on the capital outlay transfer this year of $1,360,000, the rate required to support this year's budget, and based on a 5-year average consumption, is $525, which is slightly more than the $514 rate. But we had budgeted additional transfers this year because of the surplus revenue we received in FY13 because of the dry summer. The current rate funding for CIP, so the current rate of 514 would support an annual transfer of $1,230,000 to the CIP.
Elizabeth, this new reporting, are you going to be able to take this data and test some of the ideas, like Alderman Tack's idea of having a higher monthly but including a certain amount of water, and throw that spaghetti against the fridge and try this way and a demand charge or a...
Yeah, what it's going to allow us to do is to generate some pro formas on what percentage of accounts in given quarters will go above a particular consumption level. And so we'll be able to use different formulas at different thresholds and at different rates, calculate some estimated revenues for.
So some of these other concepts could be more easily tested.
Absolutely.
Oh, great.
Yeah, because what we've done is created a model where we've used a low usage residential, a medium usage residential, and a high usage residential, and a commercial. And we've actually factored in their actual consumption, and we can plug in different formulas
But it's
to see-
assumptions based on assumptions based on. yeah.
Absolutely, to compare how the current rate structure would compare to a new rate structure. But that's looking at 4 accounts. What we would rather do is look at it system-wide to see, obviously, that's important to look at how it affects different types of users, but what we're going to need to know is what that's going to do to the revenue overall for the system.
Elizabeth, is it correct then that it looks like about 3.5 million is the cost of the capital improvement? I mean, if we don't pump a drop of water, just to have the plant there, is that the two figures, the debt service and capital outlay? Or is there something else in there?
If we don't, debt service is committed. Capital outlay is, you could defer capital outlay and postpone capital improvements, but capital outlay is funding the 5-year CIP capital improvements to the water system. And so the debt service is for capital improvements done in the past funded from bonds. Capital outlay is to fund the ongoing improvements going forward. And yes, that would be the combined 3.5. There's nothing else in those 2 line items. And then the other 3.481 is simply the operations, the personnel, the chemicals.
So just to have the system in place is about 3.5 million?
Right.
Okay.
And also, alluding to the discussion next Thursday, December 12th, on the capital improvements, keep in mind that the projected capital improvement program for the water fund going forward is about 2.5 million per year. So going forward, they're anticipating significantly higher capital improvement requirements for the water system than we're funding currently.
Another quick question. Does the debt service have a sunset where that's going to turn into operational
it's
way out there?
Way out there,
Okay.
yeah. About 2032, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different city council.
Different city council.
Unless they abolish term limits.
One other comment you made, and you may be planning on touching on this, but the concept of including a certain amount of water in the base rate it has a history, right?
Yeah, and so getting back to the 3 sort of issues that we were tasked to study at the October 21st Finance Committee. Chairman Pantaleone is talking about the 3rd bullet at the bottom as far as inclusion of a minimum water amount in the fixed rate. One thing I did not know in October, because of the short time I've been here, is that there is some history there. In 2007, the city contracted Burns and McDonnell to come in and do an extensive water rate study for the city. And as part of that water rate study, they recommended and the city implemented eliminating a minimum water structure, billing structure that actually included a minimum bill that had a certain amount of water consumption built into the fixed rate. That was a billing structure that was fairly unpopular among the residents and caused some issues operationally throughout the year for finance and public works. And so Burns and McDonnell recommended actually moving to this lower fixed charge and billing the variable rate from the first 1,000 gallons consumed. So,
And the primary source of the controversy, I understand, was we have a lot of citizens that leave town for extended periods of time, and they objected loudly to having to pay for a bunch of water that they weren't using and effectively subsidizing the people that were staying here. So, right or wrong, that's the history.
That was a good idea.
I did too, but.
Yeah, so the point on that is that the recommendation wasn't really for logical reasons, it was for emotional reasons that we eliminated that.
Voter reasons.
Political reasons.
We're aldermen.
Well, but we're trying to solve an economic
right.
situation. And the fact of the matter is that if you have a water system, even if you're not here 6 months out of the year, it costs us money to prepare for your return. And so, to me, that's not logical to say, well, when I'm not here, I'm not adding anything to the system, which is actually factually false.
Well, but
So-
let me clarify, because I think there's a distinction here. The argument wasn't that they weren't willing to pay for some fixed costs. They just didn't want to include water usage into that fixed cost because it was a commodity that they were not going to consume when they weren't here.
Well, except that they do consume it when they're here, so they won't be paying for it. If they're not here, it'll be included and they'll pay a fixed rate. And then when they're gone, they're not consuming anything else, right?
No,
I mean,
and go ahead and clarify. I think what we heard the direction was
Right.
that your fixed cost would include 1,000 gallons a month. Well, I'm not using 1,000 gallons a month.
well, that depends if you do it on a monthly basis. If you said this includes the use of up to, let's say, 4,000 or 10,000 gallons a year, and that first 10,000 gallons is included in the fixed amount, only it's, apportioned quarterly. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
I
but
mean-
we can't accomplish that, I think, billing quarterly to do that. You're going to get billed on a quarterly basis of how much water you use, and part of the, depending on where you live in town, you could be away for an entire quarter and use zero water.
Okay.
I was somewhat baffled too, but I think I understood, and so it's just something that we need to be aware of.
Right.
Because there will be many who remember this from only 5 years ago.
Elizabeth or George, refresh my memory. What is the objective for what we're doing?
For the minimum, for the water rate structure,
For looking at this whole analysis, what is our objective?
well, we had initially started talking about what different objectives we wanted to accomplish. And so we had set out in September and talked about the different objectives, equity being one objective that people tend to look at in pricing water. Is it important that residents perceive the water rate structure to be equitable? That leans you towards a variable rate. You pay what you use. Conservation, if that's an important variable, then should we look to a tiered rate structure that would incentivize conservation? That was deemed to be an important factor, and so we were asked to explore the tiered rate structure. Did we want to minimize or begin to reduce the effect of weather conditions on the variability of the revenue from year to year? That would lean you further towards a fixed rate structure. So did we want to reduce that 90-10 proportion of our structure and increase the fixed rate portion and reduce the variable rate portion to begin to try to smooth out those revenues from year to year and lessen the weather impacts? And so we're trying to accomplish a lot of goals, I guess, is the answer.
So, but I'm hearing fairness or equity, and I'm hearing consumption. So this is not necessarily an objective to cover increased capital expenditures. For instance, it's an equity issue and a consumption
No,
issue.
I think there was also an objective, if I recall correctly. We're bumping up against our capacity here, and it seems like we're already there, and there are more homes being built and more underground sprinkler systems being put in, and the idea is to create, as Alderman Moore pointed out, one idea is also to help create a reserve for, future expansion of the water plant.
So there's a third objective and there's a financial objective.
And I
Which-
thought that
which
was the
seems
first
to-
objective.
Well, it could be. I just wanted to, I literally was confused. I mean, I'm not trying to bring this thing together.
Those were methods, but just the
Yeah, well,
objectives.
then from what I'm hearing, if this is a financial thing and if it's a capital thing, it leads me to then concentrate on the fixed as opposed to the variable. Because of the snowbirds, I mean, it's their water system as much as it is the water system for everybody else. So this seems to me to be focused on the fixed. Yes?
Yep.
Well, maybe if
And just to add, we had said that when we did bring back potential rate structures for the council to consider, we would bring back an option that was revenue neutral, but bring back an option that also generated additional revenue, recognizing the increasing need in capital funding for the water fund, so that the council could see both options, so that we would consider both.
I mean, I guess one, and along those lines, just to pick up on what Elizabeth just suggested, I guess speaking for myself, I'm a little concerned about, I mean, the number of permutations and combinations that this could present to us is, I mean, let's say there are 20 viable options here, minimally, maybe there are more. I don't know how this council sitting in the finance committee or in the city council can reasonably go through all that and have a discussion that leads to a conclusion anytime soon. So my thought is maybe there needs to be a different way to parse through this.
George, would it be easier for us? You're right. I mean, you can, all kind of formulas, you can come up with 50 different formulas, depending upon, especially if you were a pricing wonk. But it does seem to me that this could argue for just keeping what we've got, just increasing the fixed cost to cover our increased capital expenditures.
That's an option. I guess what I was leaning to
And
is...
then it's justifiable to everyone based on, hey, we just have increased capital here that we've got to do to maintain what we've got.
And all the way
it's got to
to
be
the-
spread across everybody evenly.
And then I'll cross all the way to the other end, leaving it the way it is and raising the usage rate,
Or not evenly, depending on your water
or
usage.
maybe putting in a second tier. I mean, it's already starting, we've got so many different options here.
Well,
And
that's
the
the
last
thing-
time this was done, we hired an outside consultant to sort through it, and now we're second guessing that, so.
Well, and I think importantly, and I think Alderman Peneleon, to your point, it might be appropriate to assign it to the Public Works Committee because they've dealt with this issue in the past. But I think that you have multiple goals that have multiple or various impacts on each other, because the conservation issue is critical to the capital issue. Because keep in mind, for 8 months of the year, you're only pumping 4 million gallons. You don't need any capital expansion at 4 million gallons a day. It's the summertime when you go up to 14 and 12, that's where you now talk about we got to expand our plant. So if I don't water my lawn, do I have to contribute to the expansion of the plant because I'm not contributing to the problems for 3 months of the year? That's the kind of philosophical conversation you need to have, which is going to impact this. So I think it was an excellent idea to step back and remind ourselves what is the goal that we're trying to accomplish, and then based on that goal and what the priorities are, then focus on how to best tier or develop an equitable system.
Well, I don't know. This all seems too complicated to me. It seems to me that the logical thing to do is to start by simply saying, hey, our fixed costs are not nearly being addressed by these fixed charges that we have. And that's the real elephant in the room. You've got $2.5 million debt service, and we're only collecting $640,000 a year in fixed fees to pay for that. And that's really what we need to pay for. So why not make it very simple and get the social engineering out of it and simply say, you know what, let's look at simply doubling the fixed rate. Let's start with that now. We can look at these other things over the span of the next 1 to 2 years, but at least we've accomplished a couple things. We've offset some of these fixed costs, which everybody in town, whether they're here 12 months or 6 months, accrued those liabilities. And why make it more complicated than that?
I happen to agree with that.
I do too.
Yeah, I do 3. Do we know how many meters there are in the city? If we did this on a
66 or
pro rata,
6,700 you thought.
You've divided the debt service by the number of meters. What's that figure per meter?
I can't do it in my head. It's 2.2 million divided by 6,660.
Two.
We have an iPhone calculator.
And Elizabeth, I'm going to ask a question that's, again, a little out there, but just a curiosity. Are our water loss in the system, I think the last time this was argued by an older, crazier alderman was about 10%. How does that fit in? Do we put that in as far as just the, as far as the fixed portion? Are we reducing it? Yeah, I mean, does that factor in at all? Is it completely?
It varies. We track it from month to month. Public Works tracks it. And we don't factor it into our budget because we only budget based on build.
But production
Production.
costs something, and
Yes.
if we're losing 10% of our water that's being produced, in effect, if it's in the fixed rate, if you're using the water or not, you're paying for that portion that's being produced. So, yeah, I mean, in a way, you're paying for water
Right.
usage somehow, some way, buried deep in there.
Can I get a refresher question from Mike Thomas? Mike, you said the water plant physically has room for more modules,
Correct.
like pads. And if we were to increase the size of the water plant as a financial goal for dealing with the future, is there a number that you could give us or somebody that would be the financial goal for the capital improvement? Or did we already get that? I'm just trying to remember.
We are working on that with Strand and Associates, our engineering firm. We'll probably have that in the next week or two. I believe we're meeting with them the week of the 16th. And at that point, they'll be able to give us.
So then we would know how
ballpark
much
estimate.
expansion would cost.
Correct.
And what it would give us.
X dollars would get you X million gallons out of the plant.
And when would we know?
We should have a very basic ballpark within 2 weeks. They're
You know,
finishing up.
Michael, it might be helpful, not to put pressure on you, but it might be helpful to have a really basic ballpark by the 12th.
Okay. We will do that.
And I think that'll help us a great deal with the discussion that night.
Okay, sure. We absolutely will.
Other comments? We're running out of time here. We've got a couple more minor things to discuss, but other comments, observations?
Mr. Alderman Panley, I would suggest, and if it was Alderman Reisenberg, but this feels like it's something that needs to go back to Public Works for some more process. And I think that feels like the next step, and I think that's the logical place for this as we go forward in the short term.
Anybody
I agree.
agree, disagree? I mean, I think
Agree.
getting this to,
agree.
getting into the hands of a smaller, more focused group, I think is important, in my opinion. That's kind of why I brought that up a few minutes ago.
And I'll give you the credit, I'm sorry.
By the way, Elizabeth, if we added the 3.5 million for capital and debt service, divided by 6,700, and it'd be about $130 a quarter per meter. Or $522 a year, so.
Okay.
Oops.
Other thoughts? Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Other business really just included some transaction analysis of the real estate transfer tax, which I think Elizabeth may be able to give us a bit of here.
Yeah, this was requested at the October Finance Committee meeting, and although we included it in the budget packet in November, I can imagine that it was probably lost in the nearly 200 pages that you had. But I just included it in this packet. So what we did was we actually ended up going back to the very beginning of the real estate transfer tax, and we annualized the analysis to show by fiscal year the actual transactions. We separated the transaction counts between exempt and residential taxable transfers. So the exempt stamps issued, we just had a $50 administrative processing fee, and there was no transfer tax that was generated. The taxable transfers were residential. We pulled out commercial for this analysis so that it didn't distort the numbers. So you can see how many taxable residential transfers we had during that year. As you can see, fiscal year '07 was only 10 months, so that was not a full 12 months. And then the residential gross real estate transfer tax revenue is just the total dollar amount collected from those residential taxable transfers. And then the average revenue transfers, just the revenue divided by the number of transfers. And then what we did was just took the average revenue divided by the $4 per thousand to show the average sales price for the residential transfers in that fiscal year, so you could see the average sales price change by fiscal year. And then the chart below, just to give you an opportunity to track how this is changing more on a more current basis. We just graphed this back to January 2011, and we graphed it monthly. So you've got the average revenue per residential RETT transaction for that month. And you can see the change by month, so you'll be able to track how this changes month to month. So I don't know if this provides the additional kind of drill down look you were hoping for, to give you an idea of what's happening with the market and how it's changed over time, what's happening as far as we see it, as far as the real estate transfer tax activity. But
We're getting more revenue, but the sales,
right,
the sales are going through the roof, no pun intended. 379 transfers last year. I mean, that's way above anything we've seen. And at 271 so far in this fiscal year. And I assume there's going to be a lot more that come in before the end of the fiscal year.
right. Interestingly, our high count of 379 was in the year that it was the lowest average sales price.
So a lot of sales at lower prices.
Right.
Is it possible, because when we talk about things like real estate transfer taxes, I get concerns from my friends that are in the real estate business. Is it possible for a future meeting to show where our transfer tax costs relate to the other communities, or is that like handing you a giant hairball? Or
What our transfer tax fees are compared
Yes.
to other communities? Sure, because I think there's Chicago Title, I think there's a
Yeah, there's
title
a
company that
matrix
puts a
out there.
report
I
out
would-
there.
I would
That's
just like to know
easy.
for cheapest or most expensive or in the middle, or,
Yeah, $4 is, yeah, I'll pull that off.
I don't know
and
what
put
that
it in the next month's
looks like
packet.
compared to Highland Park or Deerfield, or. We're usually defendable in that regard, so I just would
Yes.
like to show it.
Other observations, questions? Okay, and then the next question that we were going to talk about, this is another request from a prior meeting, was to talk about the debt service capacity in the tax levy, which is the last chart in the package here.
This was just intended to give you a visual of the impact of the change included in the ordinance on the agenda this evening. So in the ordinance restating and reaffirming 2008-08, it includes the change in the debt service cap to allow the inflation factor based on the municipal price index. So what you have seen historically is this chart that shows the layered debt. The red debt was the pre-2013 debt serviced by year. The blue line is the additional debt service that was added by the 2013 refunding issue. And then the green is the projected debt service associated with the new money issue currently scheduled for 2014. And so that was based on current market conditions when we did this in September. Now, the purple line, the fixed line just above 2.5 million, was the fixed debt service levy cap that was originally imposed in 2004 and restated in 2008. But by applying the inflation factor based on the municipal price index, that debt cap is instead the blue line that goes up. This municipal price index is published annually, so you can see the update through 2012. The 2013 number has not been published yet, so when it is published, we'll update the 2013, and then we've just left it constant going forward, so you can see how that changes.
So what is the actual difference? It looks like it's almost $1 million.
It's currently 3.3 million, so it's about $800,000 difference by taking, but keep in mind that's inflation from 2004. So you've layered on about 9 years of inflation above that 2,589,000.
Why is the blue line level if inflation,
Because we've made no assumptions about what it will do in the future. So we've just updated it through the published index and then left it level going forward. And so each year we'll update it as the index is adjusted, but we haven't made any assumptions about what that index is going to do in future years.
Well, you have, actually. You've assumed it's going to be zero.
I
I mean, from this chart, it assumes zero
Right.
inflation beyond 2013. That's why the line goes flat. But the prior number was not indexed, if you recall, so that was just a hard number that was put on in 2000 and, I don't know, when was that?
2004.
2004, and never, contemplated the fact that inflation was out there. So if you assumed a 1 or 2% inflation, my guess is that the blue line would go up at a pretty significant, at a noticeable angle over time.
I think the Federal Reserve has said it wants inflation of, 5%?
So if it's
so
if it's
this
caused
in
by
a-
economic activity, that's good. If it's caused by other forces, it's not so good.
So this in and of itself does nothing to taxes. It just simply, adjusts the cap under which the city operates, and then each debt issue comes before the council and is approved, and we look at what that will do to taxes going forward when we look at each potential bond issue. So we just wanted to give you the visual and give you the new updated numbers now that we had actually used the index and adjusted the cap number, so.
What that really is a reflection of is the diminishing purchasing power of a dollar.
Absolutely.
It's not that we're running wild and tacking on new expenses. It's that everything buys less because the dollar is being devalued.
Now, is there part of this green part cut off, or is that staying within our limits?
Staying within our limits.
Do we have more debt that we want to put on between now and 2033? I know it's almost a silly question.
I guess we'll talk about that next Thursday.
Okay.
That's a subject for the next meeting.
It looks,
But
if I got
originally,
this chart in the mail, it would look like we don't need to change it for another 20 years.
well, we will talk about that on
Okay.
next Thursday.
But I'm wrong, right?
But that was our challenge. That's the challenge that we had, is that we had really risen up to the cap and had
And we
needs
have
that
other
couldn't get-
processes in place to limit our
Yes.
spending, other than a rule that's 9 years old that didn't take into account inflation.
Right.
Okay. Have an opportunity for the public to address the Finance Committee. There will be another opportunity to address the Finance Committee at the City Council meeting as well. Any members of the public that would like to address the Finance Committee? There being none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
We'll begin the city council meeting in about 5 minutes, so at about 7:42.
Oh, well, don't stop.